Coach, if you can you please just start off by talking to us about what wrestling, the sport of wrestling, means to you as an individual, and what lessons the sport provides?
Well, obviously for me, growing up in Dale City and having a sport like wrestling kind of guide me, giving me a lot of direction and no question the opportunities that I've had through the sport of traveling all over the world and being able to meet people of all ethnic backgrounds, it's just been a true privilege, and obviously having the opportunity to reach the highest level in our sport, which is an Olympic gold medal, getting to do that twice. You look back and you realize how lucky I was, and sport of wrestling gave me a lot of opportunities.
That all said, why is the IOC's decision to eliminate wrestling from the 2020 Olympics so significant?
I think the disappointing thing this morning, hearing that the IOC is recommended to eliminate wrestling from 2020, was just devastating. I mean, there was no one in the sport of wrestling throughout the world that had any idea that this was going to happen. I mean, there's been talk, but there's been talk about a lot of sports over the course of the last 8 years. So we were caught off guard with this, and what was disappointing is we really didn't have any representation to fight for ourselves, and just a judgment that did not have credentials behind it, and that's what's disappointing, and really that's the way we can get the sport back in 2020.
Who's most affected by this?
I think when you talk about who's most affected by it, I think you're looking across the country, across the world. I mean, our sport is diversified. We have almost 200 countries that participate in wrestling. Comparing that with the other core sports in the Olympic movement, it's one of the highest. We meet their criteria of the IOC's criteria of being an Olympic sport. We meet almost every criteria they have, and we're one of the sports up at the top in several of those categories. And that's diversity, that's participation throughout the world. We have 1 million wrestlers just in the United States. There's not 1 million athletes in some of the sports that are participating in the Olympics. So the way this came about and the way this was passed, or the recommendation that came down of eliminating wrestling for 2020, again, it's not justified.
What were the numbers like in the Olympics this year as far as the amount of countries that were actually represented, and how did wrestling stack up with other sports as far as the amount of countries that were actually competing at this last Olympics?
This past Olympics in London in 2012, there was over 70 countries that participated in wrestling. When you compare that to other sports, obviously, again, wrestling is very high on the list, if not one of the highest. And that has always been what the Olympic movement is about, is participation, countries participating in all the sports. And wrestling has always moved, our international governing body has always moved to develop wrestling throughout the world. There's been clinics put on in countries where they had no wrestling in the 80s, in 1980, where they do have now wrestling that is developed, and even Olympic members going to the Olympics. So when you talk about participation, again, it's a number that is staggering. It's well representative, and it meets every criteria that they're looking for.
You mentioned earlier, you said that this decision was not justified. If we could explore that a little bit more. I mean, why?
Well, I think one
wrestling?
of the most disappointing things as I've learned today is that this decision came down among the executive committee of the IOC, International Olympic Committee. And we had no representation. We had no representation from the United States on the executive committee. How can you vote on a sport that has dominated throughout time in the Olympics? Their medal count has been one of the highest in any sport, and have no representation. The United States of America won the medal count, and there's no representation for our sport, nor for our governing body in a vote. Nor do we have any idea that wrestling is a real threat of being dropped. You know, so there was just no voice in the decision making of the IOC Executive Committee.
Should we even be having this conversation? Should wrestling even be one of the sports that's considered to be on the chopping block?
Well, when you look at the criteria of the IOC and everything that their movement's about, wrestling shouldn't even be considered on the chopping block. You know, the last three sports they've recommended, of course, two of them is two of our best sports, baseball and softball, and now wrestling. Those three sports have traditionally, from the United States, have done extremely well. So you're wondering what's going on. What's wrong with this problem? You know, and baseball, softball, love the sports, but wrestling meets everything that you're looking for, especially the participation, the diversity throughout the world that participates in this sport. You know, although we got 1 million wrestlers in the United States, that's a small number compared to some of the countries. And the fight's just starting, you know, and again, it was a recommendation from the IOC that wrestling not be in the 2020 Olympics. There will be additional meetings from this point forward in May, and final decision in September of 2013. I can tell you the wrestling world will come together. It will unite, and the fight's just begun.
What are the ramifications of this decision on American folk-style wrestling, colleges, high schools, youth?
Well, remember, you know, Olympic wrestling in our high school and college, as well as our youth wrestling, it's two different worlds, you know. You're talking about it affecting just a few, and the sport and the training in wrestling is totally different. In high school wrestling, we've grown over this last decade, 40,000 plus athletes. We've added 95 college programs in all divisions over the last 10, 12 years. You know, wrestling throughout the country, the United States, is very strong. I think it's for those few young men that at the age of 10 or 12 that have a dream, you know, and it's what gives them the stability in their life, the discipline, the courage to chase that dream. It's personal. You know, the state of Oklahoma since 1924 has won Olympic gold medals in the sport of wrestling. It's probably our most successful sport in the Olympics for the state. And I'm fighting for that 12-year-old kid in Oklahoma. I'm fighting for that kid that has that dream. And everything that the criteria of the IOC has with who's going to be in the Olympics and who's not is being met by wrestling. And it's setting the standard in a lot of their categories or a lot of their criterias of what sport is in and what sport is out.
Coach, what was your first reaction when you heard the news?
Well, I think my first reaction this morning, you know, it was emotional. It was just you know, it was a tough 15 minutes, you know, because I didn't know at the time that there was an opportunity to fight back. I didn't know at the time that that we can win this battle. You know, it just made me sick to think that the opportunity for a 14, 15, 16-year-old kid who has thoughts of being an Olympic champion is going to be erased. And we may only be talking about a handful of kids. Made me sick. As the day went on, I got stronger, you know, and the people in the sport on the phone a lot today, from not just people in this country but all over the world, is ready to stand together.
So where do we go from here? Or is that a question that still just needs to be answered and we're trying to figure out?
Well, I think where we go from here is we recognize that we have till May. The final decision in May is the first meeting, and final decisions in September. We have some great leaders right now that are working on where do we go from here. I can tell you that countries like India, that one of the few medals that they won was in wrestling. One of the strongest sports is wrestling. All through Iran, Azerbaijan, Russia, the Japanese have dominated and had one of their best Olympics in wrestling. All the republics, the republics of the old Soviet Union, it's one of their key sports and one of the only medals that they get. You know, it's not just us. You know, it's not just Oklahoma State or John Smith that has passion for wrestling. It's all over this world, and there's a lot of numbers behind it. And with those numbers is how you get things changed.
That said, what do you say to the youth wrestler that you said that you're fighting for that's growing up? What
I think,
you
know, any young kid out there that hears this, that there's not going to be wrestling in the Olympics, keep fighting, keep working, keep training. I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight for you, and there's only one option with this decision, and that's to get it overturned. And I'm going to live every day till that decision's made to make a difference in the final decision.